5 a.m. code. My tipping point. How one small decision at dawn changed everything. Prologue. The moment before dawn. The alarm pierces the darkness at 4:55 a.m. For a moment, I lie motionless under my warm blanket, listening to the gentle breathing of my dog beside the bed. The winter air is crisp and uninviting. Every fiber of my being wants to hit snooze and sink back into the comfort of sleep. After all, I don't need to leave for my office job until 8 a.m. But this moment, this daily battle between comfort and change, has become the fulcrum upon which my entire future balances. 3 months ago, I made a decision that seemed insignificant at the time: to wake up 3 hours earlier than necessary to learn web development. A simple choice, really. Just set the alarm clock a little earlier. Yet, as I would come to understand, this small adjustment would become my personal tipping point, the moment when everything changed. Malcolm Gladwell defines a tipping point as that magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior crosses a threshold, tips, and spreads like wildfire. While Gladwell primarily focused on social phenomena, I've come to believe that personal transformations have their own tipping points, precise moments when change becomes not just possible, but inevitable. As I finally push aside the blanket and plant my feet on the cold floor, I think about how different this morning routine is from my previous life. For 6 years, I had followed the same pattern. Wake up at 7 a.m., rush through breakfast, squeeze onto a crowded train by 8 a.m., and spend the next 9 hours in an office cubicle processing paperwork. The days blended together in a monotonous stream of Excel spreadsheets and water cooler conversations. It wasn't a bad life, exactly. The salary was stable if modest. The work was straightforward if unfulfilling. I had weekends free and enough vacation days to take a trip or two each year. By all conventional metrics, I was doing fine. Yet something was missing, a sense of purpose, perhaps, or the feeling that I was growing and challenging myself. The catalyst came in the form of a simple website I stumbled across one evening. Tired after another long day at the office, I was mindlessly scrolling through YouTube when I came across a video titled "Build Your First Website in 1 Hour, Complete Beginner's Guide." Out of curiosity, I clicked. What followed was a revelation. Watching lines of HTML and CSS transform into a beautiful, functional web page felt like witnessing magic. But it was a kind of magic I could understand, could learn to perform myself. That night, I stayed up until 2 a.m. following along with the tutorial, creating my first crude web page. It wasn't much, just a few paragraphs of text and a badly aligned image, but it was mine. I had built something from nothing. The next day at work, I couldn't stop thinking about code. While inputting data into spreadsheets, my mind wandered to HTML tags and CSS selectors. During the morning meeting, I doodled website layouts in my notebook. That evening, I dove back into tutorials, learning about div containers and flexbox layouts. But by 9 p.m., exhaustion from the workday had set in. My eyes couldn't focus on the screen, and my brain refused to absorb new information. This pattern continued for several weeks, working all day, trying to learn to code in the evenings, but always too tired to make real progress. Something had to change. That's when I remembered reading about the morning routines of successful people. How many of them woke up before dawn to work on their most important goals before the day's obligations began. The idea seemed simultaneously obvious and impossible. Wake up at 5 a.m.? Voluntarily? In winter? Yet the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My mind was freshest in the morning. The world was quiet. No distractions, no interruptions. Just me, my computer, and the code. The first morning was brutal. The second was worse. By the end of the first week, I wondered if I was slowly losing my mind. But then something strange happened. I started to look forward to these early morning sessions. There was something magical about coding while the rest of the world slept, about watching the sun rise as I solved programming problems. More importantly, I was making real progress. 1 hour of focused learning in the morning was worth more than 3 hours of exhausted evening study. The concepts began to stick. The code started to flow more naturally. I found myself thinking in HTML and CSS, seeing the underlying structure of websites I visited. Now, 3 months into this new routine, I stand in my dark kitchen making coffee, my dog padding quietly beside me. In 15 minutes, I'll be at my desk, opening my laptop to continue work on my latest project, a portfolio website that will hopefully help me land my first web development job. I'm still an office worker by day, but in these precious morning hours, I'm becoming something else: a creator, a problem solver, a developer. This transformation hasn't been easy. Every morning presents the same challenge: the warm bed versus the cold floor, comfort versus growth, the known versus the unknown. But I've learned that tipping points often disguise themselves as small, daily choices. It's not the dramatic gestures that change our lives, but the quiet decisions we make when no one is watching. Scientists who study habit formation talk about the concept of minimum viable effort, the smallest possible action that moves you toward your goal. For me, that minimum viable effort was simply getting out of bed at 5 a.m. Everything else, the learning, the coding, the transformation, flowed from that one decision. Looking back, I can see now that my personal tipping point wasn't just about waking up early. It was about taking control of my time, about choosing discomfort over stagnation, about deciding that the person I wanted to become was worth more than the person I was comfortable being. Malcolm Gladwell describes 3 rules of social epidemics: the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context. While these rules were originally applied to social trends, I've found they also apply to personal transformation. The law of the few suggests that change is often driven by a small number of influential people. In personal transformation, you must become that influential person in your own life. The one who sets the example, makes the hard choices, shows up every day. The stickiness factor refers to the specific quality that makes an idea or trend memorable and impactful. In my case, the stickiness came from the immediate feedback loop of coding. Write some code, see the results, fix the errors, improve the design. Each small success made me want to learn more. The power of context speaks to how behavior is influenced by environment. By choosing to code in the quiet hours before dawn, I created a context conducive to learning and growth, free from the distractions and demands of the workday. As I sit down at my desk this morning, my coffee steaming beside my keyboard, I think about the thousands of others who might be at their own personal tipping points right now. Maybe they're considering a career change, learning a new skill, or simply trying to break free from patterns that no longer serve them. To them, I would say this: look for the small changes that could lead to big transformations. Find your minimum viable effort. Create your own context for success. The sky outside is beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn appearing on the horizon. I open my laptop and begin to code, adding another small piece to the foundation of my new life. In 3 hours, I'll put on my office clothes and head to my day job. But right now, in this moment before dawn, I'm already becoming who I want to be. This is a story about transformation, about how small changes can lead to big results, about finding your own tipping point and having the courage to cross it. But mostly, it's about that moment when you realize that the person you are is not necessarily the person you have to remain. The real question is, what will you do with your moment before dawn? Chapter 1. The Breaking Point. There's a peculiar kind of silence that descends on a corporate office at exactly 5:01 p.m. It's the sound of resignation, of hundreds of computer mice clicking shut down, ID badges being collected from desk drawers, and shoulder bags being packed with the same precise movements used yesterday and the day before. I remember this silence well. For 6 years, it marked the end of another identical day at my office job in Osaka's business district. The routine was as predictable as the changing of traffic lights. Gather belongings, bow to colleagues, join the stream of dark-suited workers flowing toward the elevator banks, and merge into the river of humanity, heading for the subway station. But on this particular evening in late autumn, something was different. As I stood waiting for the elevator with my colleagues, watching the floor numbers slowly descend, I felt an unfamiliar sensation in my chest, a tightness that wasn't quite anxiety, wasn't quite frustration, but something in between. It was the feeling of reaching a breaking point, though I wouldn't recognize it as such until much later. The modern office worker's life is an exercise in carefully managed expectations. You learn to measure success in small increments. A slightly larger year-end bonus, an extra day of paid leave, a desk closer to the window. Your ambitions are shaped by the physical and psychological architecture of corporate life. The organizational charts that show exactly how far you can climb, the performance reviews that define your worth in decimal points, the casual conversations about retirement plans that remind you to think in terms of decades rather than dreams. My position was secure, if unexciting. I worked in the administrative department of a mid-sized company, processing documents and maintaining databases. The work required attention to detail, but little creativity. My colleagues were pleasant, my supervisor was fair, and the coffee in the break room was surprisingly good. By any objective measure, I was doing fine. Yet that evening, as I swiped my train pass through the ticket gate and joined the crowd waiting on the platform, the weight of fine felt suddenly unbearable. I watched the faces around me. All of us in our dark suits. All of us clutching our briefcases and smartphones. All of us waiting for the next train to carry us home so we could rest and repeat the cycle tomorrow. The Japanese have a word, satsu, which describes the state of just going through the motions, of following established patterns without thought or purpose. It's not quite depression and not quite boredom. It's a kind of emotional autopilot that can persist for years if left unchallenged. That was my state for most of my office career. Wake up at 7 a.m., leave the house at 8 a.m., arrive at the office by 9 a.m., spend the next 8 hours processing paperwork, attending meetings, and responding to emails. Leave at 5 p.m., arrive home by 7 p.m., eat dinner, watch TV, sleep, repeat. The salary was enough to live comfortably in my modest apartment. I could afford occasional dinners out, new clothes when needed, and even a short vacation once a year. My parents were proud that I had secured a stable position at a respectable company. By the standards of my upbringing, I had achieved success. But success, I was learning, is a relative concept. While my parents' generation valued stability above all else, a natural response to the economic uncertainties they had faced, my generation witnessed a different kind of world emerging. A world where traditional career paths were being disrupted by technology, where individuals could build businesses from their laptops, where skills mattered more than seniority. These changes were happening all around me, yet I remained in my comfortable bubble of corporate routine. Until that autumn evening when something inside me finally cracked. Perhaps it was the weight of accumulated small frustrations, the meetings that could have been emailed, the tasks that seemed purposeless, the feeling that my skills were slowly atrophying rather than growing. Or perhaps it was the realization that I was spending the best hours of my day, the most energetic years of my life, helping to build someone else's dream rather than pursuing my own. That evening, instead of going straight home, I got off the train one stop early and walked to a small coffee shop I had often passed, but never entered. It was the kind of place that attracted freelancers and creative types. People whose workdays didn't end at 5:01 p.m., people who seemed to be directing their own destinies rather than following predetermined paths. As I sat there, watching people tap away on their laptops with purpose and enthusiasm, I felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. These people weren't wearing suits. They weren't carrying identical briefcases. They weren't checking their watches every few minutes to ensure they were adhering to someone else's schedule. I opened my own laptop, the one I usually used only for online shopping and social media, and began to search. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first, but I knew I needed to find something different, something that would allow me to break free from the cycle of tsutsu that had come to define my life. That's when I stumbled across a video about web development. The presenter was explaining how anyone could learn to code, how the barriers to entry had never been lower, how it was possible to transform yourself from a complete beginner to a professional developer within a year if you were willing to put in the work. I stayed in that coffee shop until closing time, consuming tutorial after tutorial, article after article. By the time I finally headed home, something had shifted inside me. The breaking point had become a turning point. The next day at the office was different. Not in any way that others could see. I still performed my tasks diligently, still attended the mandatory meetings, still maintained the polite facade expected in Japanese corporate culture. But internally, I was already plotting my escape. I began to see my job not as a career, but as a temporary funding source for my true goal. Every mundane task became more bearable because it was no longer my destiny. It was just a stepping stone to something else. The morning commute became time to study coding concepts on my phone. The lunch break became an opportunity to watch tutorials with headphones on. Looking back now, I realized that reaching a breaking point isn't about dramatic gestures or sudden epiphanies. It's about recognizing that the path you're on isn't leading where you want to go and having the courage to start plotting a new course, even if you can't yet see where it will lead. Malcolm Gladwell writes about how social epidemics often begin with a few key individuals who act as connectors, mavens, and salespeople. But when it comes to personal transformation, you have to be all three. The connector who builds bridges to a new future, the maven who accumulates knowledge, and the salesperson who convinces yourself daily that change is possible. The breaking point, I learned, isn't the moment when everything falls apart. It's the moment when you finally admit to yourself that everything needs to change. It's the moment when fine is no longer enough, when the comfort of routine becomes less appealing than the uncertainty of growth. As I left the office that evening, joining once again the stream of workers heading for the trains, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the vague hope of maybe someday things will be different, but the concrete hope that comes from having a plan, even if that plan is just to wake up earlier and learn something new. The breaking point, it turns out, is just the beginning. Chapter 2. The small decision that changed everything. The smallest decisions often have the most profound ripple effects. In my case, it was the simple act of setting my alarm clock 3 hours earlier than usual. This seemingly minor adjustment would become the fulcrum upon which my entire life would pivot. The decision to wake up at 5 a.m. wasn't made lightly. I remember sitting at my kitchen table late one evening, calculating the hours. If I wanted to maintain a healthy 8 hours of sleep, I need to be in bed by 9 p.m. This meant fundamentally restructuring my entire day. No more late-night TV, no more after-work socializing, no more flexible mornings. Malcolm Gladwell writes about how social change often occurs not through gradual shifts, but through sudden tipping points, moments when small changes accumulate enough momentum to trigger massive transformations. But what he doesn't mention is how uncomfortable these tipping points can be in the moment, especially when you're the one initiating them. The first morning was brutal. When the alarm went off at 4:55 a.m., my first thought was that I must have lost my mind. The apartment was dark and cold. My dog looked at me with confused eyes, wondering why we were breaking our comfortable routine. Every fiber of my being screamed to go back to sleep. But I had made a promise to myself. I got up, splashed cold water on my face, and took my dog for a quick walk in the pre-dawn darkness. The streets of Osaka were eerily quiet, save for the occasional delivery truck or early morning restaurant worker. The city felt like it belonged to me alone. Back in my apartment, I made coffee, the first crucial ritual of what would become my new morning routine. The aroma filled the small space, creating a cocoon of warmth and purpose. By 5:30 a.m., I was at my desk, ready to begin. The psychology behind early morning routines is fascinating. Research shows that willpower is strongest in the morning, before the day's decisions and stresses deplete our mental resources. This phenomenon, known as decision fatigue, explains why many successful people wear the same clothes every day or eat the same breakfast. They're conserving their decision-making energy for more important matters. By choosing to work on my coding skills during these precious morning hours, I was essentially hacking my own psychology. There were no emails to distract me, no social media notifications, no colleagues needing my attention. Just pure, focused learning time. The first week was the hardest. My body fought against the new schedule, and my mind questioned the sanity of this decision. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. By the second week, I found myself naturally waking up a few minutes before my alarm. By the third week, I was looking forward to these quiet morning hours. What I didn't expect was how this one change would create a cascade of other positive changes in my life. Because I needed to be in bed by 9 p.m., I started being more intentional with my evening hours. I began meal prepping on weekends to save time during the week. I became more selective about social engagements. Every aspect of my life had to be reorganized around this one non-negotiable commitment. The Japanese concept of kaizen, continuous improvement through small, incremental changes, began to make more sense. By focusing on this one manageable change, waking up early, rather than trying to transform my entire life at once, I had found a sustainable path to progress. But the most surprising change wasn't in my schedule, it was in my mindset. There's something powerful about keeping a promise to yourself, especially one that requires daily recommitment. Each morning that I got up at 5 a.m., I was proving to myself that I was capable of change, that I could be disciplined, that I could choose discomfort in service of a larger goal. This shift in self-perception was subtle but profound. In Japanese culture, there's a concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the repaired piece more valuable than the original. My early morning routine became a kind of kintsugi for my life, transforming what had been a source of frustration, lack of time for learning, into something precious and valuable. The office environment began to feel different too. While my external circumstances hadn't changed, my internal landscape had shifted dramatically. I was no longer just an office worker counting down the hours until 5 p.m. I was a future web developer who happened to work in an office for now. This dual identity created an interesting dynamic. During the day, I processed paperwork and attended meetings as usual. But my mind was often occupied with the coding concepts I'd studied that morning. I found myself looking at the company's internal software systems with new eyes, understanding for the first time how they might have been built. The physical toll of early rising was real. By afternoon, I often felt my energy flagging. But this too became a valuable lesson in resource management. I learned to time my coffee strategically, to take short walks when my concentration wavered, to use my lunch break for power naps when needed. The weekends presented their own challenges. It would have been easy to break the routine and sleep in, but I knew that consistency was crucial. So I maintained the same schedule 7 days a week, using weekend mornings for longer coding sessions and deeper learning. As weeks turned into months, this small decision to wake up early began to create compound effects. Just as compound interest can turn small financial investments into significant wealth over time, these early morning hours began to accumulate into substantial progress. The psychology behind habit formation tells us that it takes approximately 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. By the end of my second month of early rising, I no longer needed to convince myself to get out of bed. The alarm would sound, and my body would respond automatically like a well-trained athlete. More importantly, I began to understand what authors and productivity experts mean when they talk about designing your life rather than just letting it happen to you. By taking control of my mornings, I had taken control of my personal development. The rest of my day might belong to my employer, but these early hours were mine alone. The ripple effects continued to spread. Colleagues noticed that I seemed more focused and energetic in the mornings, even if I was a bit tired by late afternoon. Friends commented on my new sense of purpose. Family members, initially skeptical of this dramatic schedule change, began to express curiosity about what I was learning. Looking back, I realized that the decision to wake up at 5 a.m. wasn't really about finding time to learn coding. It was about making a declaration to myself and the universe about what kind of person I wanted to become. It was about choosing growth over comfort, purpose over convenience, action over intention. The small decision to set my alarm 3 hours earlier became a daily reminder that I had the power to change my life, 1 hour at a time. It wasn't always easy, and there were plenty of mornings when the warm bed seemed infinitely more appealing than the cold floor. But as author James Clear writes, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Each morning at 5 a.m., I was voting for a different future. And slowly but surely, that future was beginning to take shape. Chapter 3. The Learning Curve. They say the hardest part of learning something new is starting. I disagree. Starting is easy. It's the sustained effort, the daily grind, the long plateau between beginner's excitement and tangible progress that tests your resolve. This was especially true in my journey to become a web developer. My early morning routine had created the time and space for learning, but now came the real challenge. What exactly should I learn, and how? The world of web development is vast and constantly evolving. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, Vue, Angular, the list of technologies seemed endless, and each came with its own learning curve. I remember sitting at my desk that first morning, coffee in hand, staring at my computer screen. The internet offered countless tutorials, online courses, and coding boot camps. The paradox of choice was paralyzing. Should I pay for an expensive course? Follow free tutorials? Build projects right away? Everyone seemed to have a different opinion about the right way to learn coding. After several days of research, I made a decision that would prove crucial. I would focus on mastering the fundamentals before moving on to more advanced concepts. Just as a house needs a solid foundation, I needed to understand the basic building blocks of web development. The Japanese concept of shuhari describes 3 stages of learning. Shu, following, breaking away, and ri, transcending. I was firmly in the shu stage. I needed to follow established patterns before I could break away from them. My method was simple but demanding. Copy 100 different websites, pixel by pixel. Not fancy web applications or complex platforms, but straightforward websites with clear layouts and typical features. This approach was inspired by the traditional Japanese practice of copying the masters. Artists would spend years meticulously reproducing famous works before developing their own style. Every morning, I would choose a website and attempt to recreate it from scratch. I started with simple landing pages, a restaurant website, a photographer's portfolio, a local business homepage. Each project taught me something new about HTML structure, CSS styling, or responsive design. The first few attempts were frustrating. My copies looked like crude imitations with misaligned elements and inconsistent spacing. But gradually, patterns began to emerge. I started to understand why certain layouts worked better than others, how to structure HTML for maximum flexibility, how to use CSS efficiently. The power of consistency became evident during this period. Each morning's practice built upon the previous day's learning. Even when I felt like I wasn't making progress, the mere act of showing up and putting in the work was creating neural pathways, developing muscle memory, building confidence. By my 30th copy, I could look at a website and immediately understand its structure. By my 50th copy, I could recreate basic layouts without referring to documentation. By my 70th copy, I was starting to add my own improvements to the designs I was reproducing. What I didn't expect was how this practice would change the way I saw the digital world. Every website I visited became a learning opportunity. Waiting for the train, I would analyze the railway company's mobile app interface. During lunch breaks, I would inspect the source code of news websites. The internet had transformed from a tool I used into a vast library of design patterns and solutions. The importance of practical experience cannot be overstated. While video tutorials and documentation were helpful, nothing taught me as much as the act of building. Each project presented unique challenges that no tutorial could fully prepare me for. How do you maintain proper spacing when text lengths vary? How do you ensure images load efficiently? How do you handle different screen sizes? These challenges often led to late nights researching solutions, debugging code, and refactoring my work. But each problem solved was knowledge gained. Each obstacle overcome was confidence built. The frustration of struggling with a particular feature for hours, only to finally solve it, became a familiar and oddly satisfying cycle. Around my 80th copy, something interesting happened. I started to see patterns not just in the code, but in my own learning process. I noticed that my biggest breakthroughs often came after periods of intense frustration. I learned to recognize the signs of being stuck and develop strategies for working through these plateaus. The concept of deliberate practice, popularized by psychologist Anders Ericsson, became my guiding principle. It wasn't enough to simply copy websites. I needed to challenge myself with increasingly complex projects, analyze my mistakes, and actively seek feedback from the online development community. I joined coding forums and started participating in discussions. At first, I could only ask questions, but gradually, I found myself able to help others who were just starting their journey. Teaching, I discovered, was an excellent way to solidify my own understanding. By the time I completed my 100th copy, I had built a substantial portfolio of work. More importantly, I had developed a deep understanding of web development fundamentals. This understanding went beyond knowing how to write code. It was about understanding the principles of good design, the importance of user experience, and the art of problem solving. The learning curve wasn't linear. There were weeks when everything clicked, followed by periods where I felt like I was moving backward. But the cumulative effect of consistent practice was undeniable. Looking back at my first attempts compared to my later work was like comparing a child's crayon drawing to a detailed sketch. One particularly memorable moment came when I recreated the website of the company I was working for. Not only did I manage to replicate it, but I found ways to improve its performance and accessibility. It was a tangible measure of how far I'd come, from someone who could barely write HTML to someone who could critique and enhance professional work. The power of dedication became most apparent during the challenging periods. There were mornings when the code wouldn't work, when solutions seemed elusive, when imposter syndrome crept in. On these days, the habit of showing up at 5 a.m. became my anchor. Even if I made little progress, the act of trying, of engaging with the material, kept me moving forward. As I approached the end of my 100 website challenge, I realized that the most valuable skill I developed wasn't technical knowledge. It was learning how to learn. Web development technologies change constantly, but the ability to break down problems, research solutions, and implement fixes is timeless. The journey from complete beginner to competent developer took exactly 6 months. 6 months of early mornings, of weekend deep dives, of constant practice and refinement. Looking back, it seems both longer and shorter than it actually was. Longer in terms of the knowledge gained, shorter in terms of the time invested. The learning curve never really ends in web development. There's always a new technology to master, a better way to solve problems, a more efficient approach to try. But by focusing on fundamentals and putting in the consistent work, I had built a foundation that would support whatever came next. As I closed my laptop after completing my 100th website copy, I felt ready for the next challenge, finding a job as a web developer. The learning curve had been steep, but I had climbed it one early morning at a time. Now it was time to put all that learning to the test in the real world. Chapter 4. The Leap of Faith. There's a moment in every journey when preparation must give way to action. For me, that moment came after completing my 100th website copy. I had the skills, I had the portfolio, but I still had my comfortable office job. It was time to make the leap from aspiring developer to professional, a transition that would prove to be as much about psychology as technology. The Japanese have a word, kakiochi, which literally means running away, but carries a deeper connotation of breaking free from constraints to pursue one's true path. As I began my job search, I felt like I was planning my own kakiochi from the corporate world. The first step was updating my resume, a deceptively challenging task. How do you present yourself as a web developer when your entire professional experience is in office administration? I spent weeks crafting my story, trying to bridge the gap between who I was and who I wanted to become. Malcolm Gladwell writes about how success often depends on advantageous discontinuities, moments when breaking with convention can lead to unexpected opportunities. My challenge was to convince potential employers that my unconventional background was an advantage rather than a liability. I emphasized my self-taught journey, positioning it as evidence of self-discipline and genuine passion. My portfolio showcased not just my technical skills, but my progression as a developer. Each project told a story of problem solving and persistence. The job search itself was methodical. Every morning after my coding practice, I spent an hour applying for positions. I created a spreadsheet to track applications, responses, and follow-ups. By evening, I was researching companies and tailoring cover letters. My weekends were devoted to technical interview preparation. The first rejection came quickly, a form email thanking me for my interest, but seeking someone with more traditional experience. The second and third rejections followed similar patterns. By the 10th rejection, I had learned not to take them personally. But it was the interviews that truly tested my resolve. The first technical interview was particularly memorable. The interviewer, a senior developer with decades of experience, asked me to explain how browser rendering works. I had practiced this question, but in the moment, my explanation came out jumbled and incomplete. "Your portfolio shows promise," he said kindly, "but we need someone who can hit the ground running." The next interview went better technically, but the company's culture seemed focused on maintaining rigid hierarchies. Exactly what I was trying to escape from. Another company loved my enthusiasm, but worried about my lack of computer science degree. Each rejection taught me something. I learned to articulate my journey more clearly, to frame my career change as an asset rather than a liability. I refined my technical explanations, practiced coding challenges, and developed better answers to common interview questions. What surprised me most was how my office job began to feel increasingly temporary. Each morning, as I put on my business suit, I felt like an actor playing a role. My real self was the person who woke up at 5 a.m. to code, who spent weekends building projects, who dreamed in HTML and CSS. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A small web development company was looking for junior developers. The company's website was outdated, and out of habit, I found myself mentally redesigning it. Instead of just submitting an application, I rebuilt their entire website, incorporating modern design principles while maintaining their brand identity. I sent them both my application and a link to my version of their website, along with detailed notes explaining my design choices. It was a risk. They might have seen it as presumptuous, but I needed to stand out, to show rather than tell what I could do. 2 days later, I received a call from their CEO. "We weren't planning to interview any career changers," he said, "but your approach intrigued us. Would you be interested in coming in for a chat?" The interview was unlike any others. Instead of grilling me on technical questions, they wanted to understand my thinking process. Why did I choose certain design elements? How would I handle specific client requests? What drew me to web development in the first place? The CEO, a former designer himself, shared his own story of career transition. "Sometimes," he said, "the best developers are the ones who come to it from other fields. They bring different perspectives, different problem-solving approaches. They offered me a position as a junior developer, with a catch. The salary would be significantly lower than my current office job. This was the moment of truth, the real leap of faith. Could I afford to take such a pay cut? Was I willing to start at the bottom again? I spent a weekend running numbers, calculating minimum expenses, considering worst-case scenarios. The salary would cover my basic needs, but there would be no room for luxuries. I would need to dip into savings for the first few months. Then I remembered something I'd read about decision-making. When faced with a difficult choice, imagine yourself in 10 years looking back at this moment. Which decision would your future self thank you for? I accepted the offer. Giving notice at my office job was surreal. My colleagues were surprised. I had hidden my morning coding sessions and job search well. My supervisor seemed genuinely puzzled. "Why would you leave a stable position to start over?" he asked. The concept of choosing uncertainty over security went against everything our corporate culture valued. The days between accepting the offer and starting my new job were filled with both excitement and terror. I had done it. I had actually done it. I was going to be a professional web developer. But with that achievement came new fears. What if I couldn't keep up? What if I had overestimated my abilities? What if this whole career change was a terrible mistake? The Japanese concept of ikigai, finding the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, became my mantra. I had found something I loved doing, something I had worked hard to become good at. Now I just needed to prove I could do it professionally. My last day at the office was anticlimactic. I cleared my desk, said my goodbyes, and turned in my ID badge. As I walked out of the building for the final time, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had shed a skin that no longer fit. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. out of habit. But instead of studying, I sat with my coffee and watched the sunrise. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was preparing for something. I was actually doing it. Looking back, I realized that the job search period, with all its rejections and uncertainties, was as crucial to my development as the technical learning. It taught me resilience, forced me to articulate my goals clearly, and helped me understand what I really wanted from my career change. The leap of faith wasn't just about changing jobs. It was about choosing to believe in myself enough to start over. It was about trusting that the hours of early morning practice, the countless lines of code, the rejections and setbacks had prepared me for this moment. As I prepared for my first day as a professional developer, I thought about how every major change requires a moment of commitment, a point of no return. I had reached mine. The safety net was gone, the practice was over, and it was time to fly. The leap of faith I was learning isn't a single dramatic moment. It's a series of small decisions that add up to transformative change. Each early morning, each line of code, each job application had been a mini leap of faith preparing me for this bigger jump. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new learning curves, new opportunities to doubt myself. But for now, I allowed myself to feel proud of how far I'd come and excited about where this path might lead. Chapter 5. The Transformation. The first day as a professional web developer felt like stepping into an entirely new world. Gone were the neat spreadsheets and predictable workflows of my office job. Instead, I found myself immersed in a fast-paced environment where every day brought new challenges, new technologies, and new opportunities to either sink or swim. The next 3 years would transform not just my technical abilities, but my entire professional identity. Looking back, this period of transformation followed a distinct pattern that Malcolm Gladwell might recognize. Preparation, incubation, and illumination. The first year was pure preparation, learning the practical realities of professional development. My early morning coding sessions had taught me the basics, but working in a professional environment was different. It wasn't enough to make something work. It had to work efficiently, be maintainable, and follow industry best practices. I was fortunate that my first project was relatively simple, building a website for a local restaurant. My team lead, Tanaka-san, was patient and methodical in his guidance. In Japan, he told me, "We have a saying, Iso gabamore, when you're in a hurry, take the long way around." It means that sometimes the fastest way to complete something is to slow down and do it properly. This philosophy became my guiding principle. While other junior developers rushed to implement features, I spent time understanding the architecture, documenting my code, and thinking about long-term maintainability. What seemed like slower progress initially proved valuable as projects grew more complex. The second year marked the incubation period, where knowledge began to transform into expertise. The projects became more challenging. E-commerce platforms, content management systems, complex web applications. Each project added new tools to my arsenal and new patterns to my problem-solving repertoire. More importantly, I began to develop what programmers call intuition, the ability to sense where problems might arise before they occur. This wasn't mystical knowledge, but rather the result of countless hours of coding, debugging, and learning from mistakes. One particular project stands out from this period, a complex web application for a financial services company. The project was challenging not just technically, but also in terms of client management and team coordination. It was here that I learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of my professional development. Technical skills are only part of the equation. The third year brought illumination, the moment when everything clicked together. I was no longer just implementing solutions. I was architecting them. Junior developers began coming to me for advice. Clients trusted my technical recommendations. The transformation from novice to professional was complete. But with this growth came a new restlessness. The same drive that had pushed me to leave my office job was now pushing me to consider the next step, freelancing. The idea had been germinating for months, sparked by conversations with other developers who had made the leap. The transition to freelance work wasn't a sudden decision, but a careful progression. I started by taking on small side projects, with my employer's knowledge and permission, building a network of contacts, and establishing my reputation in the development community. The Japanese concept of nusamu, literally to steal, but also meaning to learn by watching, became crucial during this period. I carefully observed how successful freelancers operated, how they found clients, how they managed projects, how they balanced multiple commitments. My savings had recovered from the initial pay cut of changing careers, and I had built up a small emergency fund. More importantly, I had built something even more valuable, a portfolio of successful projects and a network of satisfied clients. The moment of transition came naturally. A major client approached me directly with a project, offering a contract that would provide financial stability for several months. After careful consideration and discussion with my employer, I made the decision to go independent. The transformation from employee to freelancer brought its own challenges. Suddenly, I wasn't just responsible for coding, I was running a business. This meant handling everything from client negotiations to tax planning, from project management to marketing. But the skills I had developed over the previous 3 years served me well. The discipline of early morning coding sessions transformed into early morning business planning. The attention to detail required for clean code proved equally valuable in contract negotiations. The problem-solving mindset essential to programming helped me navigate the complexities of running my own business. The most significant transformation, however, wasn't in my technical abilities or business acumen. It was in my self-perception. I no longer saw myself as someone who had escaped office work or learned to code. I was a professional developer, a business owner, a problem solver. This shift in identity brought with it a new kind of confidence. When meeting with clients, I could speak with authority about technical solutions because I had built them before. When facing new challenges, I could approach them with calm assurance because I had overcome similar obstacles in the past. The transformation also affected how I approached learning. Rather than trying to learn everything, I became more strategic, focusing on technologies and skills that aligned with my business goals. I developed expertise in specific areas rather than trying to be a jack of all trades. One particularly satisfying aspect of this period was the opportunity to mentor others who were making similar career transitions. I remembered my own journey and the importance of having supporters along the way. Now I could be that support for others. The financial transformation was equally significant. Freelancing brought not just higher income, but also greater control over my financial future. I could choose which projects to take on, set my own rates, and scale my business according to my goals. By the end of the 3rd year, I had established myself as a successful freelance developer with a steady stream of clients and projects. But more than that, I had transformed from someone who dreamed of a different life to someone who had built that life through consistent effort and deliberate action. The Japanese concept of kaizen, continuous improvement, had become not just a professional philosophy, but a personal one. Each project, each client interaction, each business decision was an opportunity to learn and grow. Looking back at this period of transformation, I realized that the technical skills, while important, were just the foundation. The real transformation was in developing the confidence to take on challenges, the wisdom to know which opportunities to pursue, and the resilience to overcome setbacks. The early morning coding sessions that had started my journey had evolved into early morning strategy sessions. The careful copying of websites had become the careful crafting of custom solutions for clients. The leap of faith into a new career had become a series of calculated steps toward building a sustainable business. But perhaps the most profound transformation was an understanding that change is not a destination, but a continuous process. Each achievement opened new possibilities. Each solution suggested new problems to solve. Each success created opportunities for further growth. As this phase of my journey came to an end, I found myself looking toward new horizons. The freedom and flexibility of freelance work had opened up possibilities I hadn't even considered when I first started learning to code. The next chapter of my transformation was about to begin, one that would take me far beyond the confines of my home office in Osaka. Chapter 6. The New Reality. When I first started learning to code at 5 a.m. in my small Osaka apartment, I had a vague dream of freedom. Freedom from the office, freedom from the daily commute, freedom to choose my own path. But I never imagined just how literal that freedom would become. The transition to digital nomad life began almost accidentally. One of my regular clients, an Australian company, asked if I would be willing to visit their office in Melbourne for a 2-week project. The timing coincided with Japan's humid summer, making the idea of a winter escape to the southern hemisphere particularly appealing. Those 2 weeks changed everything. Working from Melbourne, I realized that my business didn't require my physical presence in Japan. My clients communicated via email and video calls. My work was stored in the cloud. My income was independent of location. The world quite literally could be my office. The Japanese have a concept called ikigai, finding the sweet spot between what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. I had found my ikigai in web development, but now I was discovering a new dimension to it, the ability to work from anywhere. The first step toward this new reality was creating systems that would allow me to work efficiently while mobile. I developed rigorous documentation practices, established clear communication protocols with clients, and built redundancies into my workflow to prevent any single point of failure. But the real game changer came from an unexpected direction. While updating my portfolio website, I received several messages asking about my design templates. This sparked an idea. What if I could package my expertise into products that could generate income without requiring my direct involvement? Malcolm Gladwell writes about how success often comes from recognizing patterns that others miss. The pattern I noticed was that many small business owners needed similar website solutions. Instead of building custom sites from scratch each time, I could create high-quality templates that businesses could purchase and customize. The development of my first digital product line took 3 months of intensive work. I created 10 different website templates, each designed for a specific type of business: restaurants, professional services, retail stores, and so on. Each template came with detailed documentation and customization guides. The launch was modest. I sold 3 templates in the first month. But unlike client work, these sales required no additional effort from me. The same template could be sold multiple times, creating what I had long dreamed of: passive income. As the template business grew, I began to experiment with other digital products. I created online courses teaching the same web development skills I had learned, wrote ebooks about transitioning to a tech career, and developed premium WordPress themes. The beauty of passive income streams is that they compound over time. Each new product added to my portfolio increased not just my income, but also my credibility in the industry. This led to speaking opportunities at web development conferences, which in turn drove more sales of my digital products. By the 1-year mark of launching my first template, my passive income covered my basic living expenses, roughly 30% of my previous full-time salary. While this might seem modest, it represented something profound: financial freedom. I no longer needed to take on client work to survive, though I chose to continue with select projects that interested me. This financial buffer allowed me to experiment with truly location-independent living. I started with short trips: a month in Chiang Mai, 2 weeks in Bali, 3 weeks in Seoul. Each location taught me something new about remote work and digital entrepreneurship. The reality of digital nomad life wasn't always as glamorous as Instagram would suggest. Finding reliable internet connections could be challenging. Time zone differences meant sometimes taking client calls at odd hours. Cultural and language barriers added complexity to simple tasks. But the benefits far outweighed the challenges. Working from different locations sparked creativity and fresh perspectives. Each new environment brought its own inspiration for design and problem solving. The digital nomad community provided a network of like-minded individuals facing similar challenges. One particularly memorable period was 3 months spent working from a co-living space in Bali. The community included developers, designers, writers, and entrepreneurs from around the world. The cross-pollination of ideas and skills led to several collaborative projects that expanded my business in unexpected ways. The freedom of location-independent work also allowed me to better serve my clients. Being in different time zones meant I could often complete projects while clients slept, creating a kind of continuous productivity cycle. Understanding different markets and cultural contexts made me more valuable to clients operating internationally. Managing the business required new skills. I learned to automate everything possible, from social media marketing to customer support. I developed systems for handling sales and updates while traveling. I built a small team of virtual assistants to handle routine tasks. The passive income streams required regular maintenance and updates. Templates needed to be updated for new web standards. Courses needed to be revised with current technologies. Marketing materials needed refreshing. But this maintenance work could be done from anywhere with an internet connection. One unexpected benefit of this new reality was the ability to say no to projects that didn't align with my goals. With basic expenses covered by passive income, I could be selective about client work, choosing only projects that offered interesting challenges or significant learning opportunities. The freedom to choose where and when to work also meant freedom to not work. I could take time to explore each new location, immerse myself in local cultures, and maintain a healthy work-life balance. The rigid schedule of 5 a.m. coding sessions had evolved into a more fluid approach to productivity. However, this freedom came with its own challenges. Without external structure, self-discipline became more important than ever. I developed routines that could travel with me: morning meditation, regular exercise, dedicated work hours, to maintain productivity and focus. The digital nomad lifestyle also required a new approach to personal finances. Income could be irregular, exchange rates could impact earnings, and international banking added complexity to business operations. I learned to maintain substantial cash reserves and diversify income sources across different currencies and payment platforms. As my passive income grew closer to my target 30% achieved, I began to think more strategically about scaling the business. Could I create more sophisticated digital products? Should I invest in better marketing? How could I leverage my growing network of international contacts? The reality of location-independent work turned out to be both more challenging and more rewarding than I had imagined. It wasn't just about working from beautiful locations. It was about building a sustainable business that could operate independently of my physical presence. This new reality also brought unexpected opportunities for personal growth. Living and working in different cultures broadened my perspective on both business and life. The challenges of adapting to new environments developed resilience and problem-solving skills that benefited both my work and personal development. Looking back at my early morning coding sessions in Osaka, I realized that I wasn't just learning to code, I was learning to create possibilities. The technical skills were important, but equally crucial were the habits of discipline, continuous learning, and adaptability that would enable this location-independent lifestyle. The achievement of 30% of my passive income goal marked not an endpoint, but a milestone. It proved that the dream of financial and location independence was achievable. More importantly, it showed that the traditional path of trading time for money wasn't the only option. This new reality, with its blend of freedom and responsibility, challenges and opportunities, has become more than just a way of working. It's become a way of living. Each day brings new possibilities for growth, learning, and creation, unrestricted by geographical boundaries or traditional business models. As I write this from a cafe somewhere in Southeast Asia, planning my next project and my next destination, I'm reminded that the biggest transformation wasn't in where I could work, but in how I could live. The reality I'm living now wasn't even imaginable when I first sat down to learn HTML at 5 a.m. in my Osaka apartment. Chapter 7. Beyond the Tipping Point. Looking back on the journey from office worker to digital nomad, from beginner coder to successful entrepreneur, it's tempting to focus on the major milestones. The first website built, the first job offer, the first passive income stream. But the real story lies in understanding the underlying patterns that made this transformation possible. Malcolm Gladwell defines a tipping point as the moment of critical mass, the threshold, the boiling point. In my case, there wasn't a single tipping point, but rather a series of them, each building upon the last to create lasting change. The first tipping point was psychological, the moment when dissatisfaction with the status quo outweighed the fear of change. This wasn't a sudden realization, but a gradual accumulation of small frustrations and unfulfilled aspirations. The Japanese concept of kochiba, literally decaying leaves, describes this perfectly. The slow, almost imperceptible process of change that suddenly becomes visible. But recognition alone isn't enough. What transformed this dissatisfaction into action was the development of clear vision. Not just a vague desire for something different, but a specific, tangible goal, becoming a web developer who could work from anywhere in the world. The role of vision cannot be overstated. Without it, discipline becomes mere routine. Determination becomes stubborn persistence without direction. Vision provides context for sacrifice, meaning for struggle, purpose for practice. This vision needed to be both ambitious enough to inspire and specific enough to act upon. Learn to code was too vague. Wake up at 5 a.m. to study HTML and CSS, build 100 practice websites, and apply for developer jobs within 6 months. That was a plan that could be executed. Determination and discipline were the engines that drove this transformation. The Japanese have a term, gun, which means enduring the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity. Those early morning coding sessions required gamen, pushing through fatigue, frustration, and self-doubt. But discipline isn't just about pushing through hardship. It's about creating systems that make success more likely than failure. The 5 a.m. wake-up time wasn't chosen randomly. It was selected because it eliminated excuses and distractions. No one schedules meetings at 5 a.m. Social media is quiet. The world is still sleeping. The power of these systems became apparent in unexpected ways. The habit of waking early, initially developed for coding practice, proved invaluable during the transition to freelance work and later to digital nomad life. It provided structure when external structure was absent. Another critical factor was the concept of Kaizen, continuous improvement. Each day brought opportunities for small improvements. A more efficient coding technique, a better way to manage time, a more effective way to communicate with clients. These incremental changes compounds over time, creating substantial transformation. The journey also revealed the importance of what Gladwell calls the power of context. The environment we create around ourselves shapes our behavior more than we realize. My transformation wasn't just about learning new skills. It was about creating an environment that supported and reinforced those changes. This meant making both physical and social changes. The physical was straightforward. Setting up a dedicated workspace, ensuring all necessary tools were readily available, eliminating distractions. The social was more challenging. Finding mentors, building a network of like-minded individuals, gradually distancing myself from influences that reinforced old patterns. Perhaps the most surprising discovery was the role of identity in maintaining momentum. As I progressed from beginner to professional developer, from employee to entrepreneur, my self-perception shifted. Each new identity brought its own standards and expectations, creating a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. This identity shift was particularly evident in how I approach problems. Early in my journey, I would think, how would a real developer solve this? Later, it became simply, how will I solve this? The imposter syndrome hadn't completely disappeared, but it had evolved into something more productive, a drive for continuous learning rather than self-doubt. The transformation also revealed the power of what might be called productive discomfort. Growth happens at the edge of our comfort zone, in that space between what we can already do and what we're trying to achieve. Learning to embrace this discomfort, rather than avoid it, was crucial. This principle applied not just to technical learning, but to every aspect of the journey. Each new step, from first job application to first client meeting, from launching digital products to embracing nomad life, required stepping into uncertainty, accepting the possibility of failure, choosing growth over comfort. Financial management played a crucial role that's often overlooked in transformation stories. The ability to take risks, to make career changes, to pursue new opportunities often depends on financial stability. Building and maintaining a financial buffer wasn't just prudent, it was strategic. The development of passive income streams was particularly transformative. It changed not just my financial reality, but my entire relationship with work and value creation. The realization that income could be decoupled from time spent working opened up new possibilities for how life could be structured. Throughout the journey, the importance of maintaining balance became increasingly clear. The Japanese concept of chawa, harmony, proved more valuable than the Western idea of work-life balance. It wasn't about rigidly separating different aspects of life, but about creating harmony between them. This harmony extended to how I approached learning and growth. Rather than trying to force rapid progress, I learned to work with my natural rhythms, alternating periods of intense focus with times of reflection and integration. This sustainable approach prevented burnout and enabled consistent progress. The role of community, both physical and virtual, cannot be underestimated. The support, knowledge sharing, and accountability provided by other developers, entrepreneurs, and digital nomads created a positive feedback loop that reinforced positive changes and provided support during challenging times. Looking beyond the tipping point, it's clear that transformation isn't a single event, but a continuous process. Each achievement opens new possibilities. Each solution suggests new problems to solve. Each success creates opportunities for further growth. The key lessons that emerge from this journey could be distilled into several principles. Clear vision is essential, but must be paired with specific, actionable plans. Systems and habits are more reliable than motivation. Environment shapes behavior more than willpower. Identity shifts can reinforce and accelerate change. Financial strategy is as important as skill development. Community support amplifies individual effort. Balance and sustainability enable long-term success. These principles aren't specific to career change or skill development. They apply to any significant life transformation. The specific steps might vary, but the underlying patterns remain consistent. Perhaps the most important realization was that reaching a tipping point isn't about waiting for some magical moment of transformation. It's about consciously creating the conditions that make transformation possible, then consistently taking actions that align with your desired outcome. In the end, the transformation wasn't just about changing what I did for a living or where I could work from. It was about fundamentally changing how I approach life itself. Moving from passive acceptance to active creation, from following established paths to creating my own. The journey beyond the tipping point continues. The same principles that enabled the initial transformation now guide ongoing growth and evolution. The vision expands, the systems refine, the identity evolves, but the fundamental patterns remain the same. As I write this from yet another corner of the world, planning the next phase of growth, I'm reminded that every ending is just another beginning. The tipping point isn't a destination. It's a launching pad for the next transformation. Epilogue, dawn of a new day. Dawn arrives differently depending on where you are in the world. In Osaka, it creeps in gradually, filtering through dense urban landscapes. In Bali, it bursts forth suddenly, painting the sky in dramatic colors. In Melbourne, it slides in sideways, catching you by surprise. After years of greeting the dawn at 5 a.m. in different corners of the world, I've learned that no two beginnings are quite the same. As I write this epilogue, I'm watching another sunrise, this time from a co-working space in Australia. The symbolism isn't lost on me. This book, like my journey, is about new beginnings, about the courage to greet each dawn with purpose and possibility. The path from office worker to digital nomad, from early morning coding student to successful entrepreneur, has been both more challenging and more rewarding than I could have imagined. Looking back, certain lessons stand out with particular clarity. First is the power of small decisions. Setting my alarm for 5 a.m. seemed like a minor choice at the time, but it set in motion a chain of events that would completely transform my life. Malcolm Gladwell writes about how small changes can have disproportionate effects, the butterfly effect of personal transformation. My early morning alarm was that butterfly, creating ripples that would eventually become waves. The Japanese concept of shokunin, the artisan's dedication to mastery, took on new meaning through this journey. What began as simple coding practice evolved into a deeper understanding of craftsmanship. Whether building websites, creating digital products, or structuring my business, the principle remained the same. Excellence isn't about perfection, but about consistent, deliberate improvement. Perhaps the most surprising lesson was about the nature of freedom itself. When I started this journey, I thought freedom meant escape. From the office, from the daily commute, from the constraints of traditional employment. What I discovered was that true freedom comes not from the absence of constraints, but from the ability to choose which constraints serve your purpose. The 5 a.m. wake-up time that initially felt like a burden became a chosen discipline. The technical limitations that frustrated me as a beginner became challenges to solve creatively. The business responsibilities that came with entrepreneurship became opportunities to design my ideal lifestyle. Financial freedom, too, proved different from what I had imagined. The The goal was never about becoming wealthy in the traditional sense, but about creating enough passive income to support a life of purpose and continuous growth. Reaching 30% of this goal has shown that it's possible, while leaving room for further development. Looking toward the future, my aspirations continue to evolve. The technical skills that once seemed like the end point have become a foundation for broader goals. Expanding the digital product line to help more people transition into tech careers. Building stronger communities around location-independent work. Creating educational resources that make coding more accessible. Developing sustainable business models that support both profit and purpose. Contributing to the evolution of work culture in Japan and beyond. These goals reflect a deeper understanding of what Malcolm Gladwell calls the power of context. Individual success is meaningful, but creating contexts that enable others to succeed has greater impact. Each person who breaks free from traditional constraints, who finds their own path to freedom and fulfillment, contributes to a larger transformation in how we think about work and life. The journey has also taught me about the importance of balance. The Japanese concept of harmony has become increasingly central to how I approach both work and life. It's not about achieving perfect equilibrium, but about maintaining dynamic balance as circumstances change. This balance extends to how I think about success itself. The metrics have shifted from purely financial measures to include impact on others' lives, personal growth and learning, quality of experiences, contribution to community, sustainability of lifestyle, joy in daily work. For those considering their own transformations, whether in career, lifestyle, or personal growth, I offer these insights. Start with the dawn. Whatever your 5 a.m. moment is, find that space in your life where you can build something new without dismantling what currently sustains you. Focus on systems over goals. The specific coding languages I learn matter less than the learning systems I developed. The amount of money I make matters less than the systems that generate it. Embrace incremental change. Most transformations look dramatic in retrospect, but consist of countless small steps forward, occasional steps back, and persistent movement in a chosen direction. Build multiple bridges. Digital products, client work, teaching, and community building all serve different purposes in my business. Don't rely on a single path forward. Stay curious. The technical skills that got me started are already evolving. The business models that work today will change tomorrow. Curiosity ensures continuous adaptation. Create your own metrics. Traditional measures of success may not align with your true goals. Define what matters to you and measure progress accordingly. Value community. The journey may be personal, but the path is easier when shared with others moving in similar directions. The future holds both challenges and opportunities. The nature of work continues to evolve. Technology keeps advancing, and the possibilities for location-independent living expand. But the fundamental principles that enabled this transformation remain relevant. Clear vision, consistent action, continuous learning, community connection, creative adaptation. As for my own next chapter, I'm exploring new ways to combine technical expertise with social impact. The digital products that currently generate passive income could be adapted to serve underrepresented communities. The knowledge gained from building a location-independent business could help others create their own paths to freedom. The sunrise is complete now, painting the Australian sky in brilliant colors. Another day of possibility begins. The early morning habit that started this journey continues to serve as a reminder. Each dawn brings new opportunities for growth, creation, and transformation. To those reading this who feel stuck in their own version of the 9 to 5 routine, who dream of different possibilities but aren't sure where to start, remember this. Every significant change begins with a single decision. It might be setting an alarm, taking an online course, or simply admitting to yourself that you want something different. Your transformation might not look like mine. It might not involve coding or digital nomad life or passive income streams. But the principles remain the same. Start small, build consistently, stay focused on your vision, and create systems that support your growth. The world needs more people willing to challenge conventional paths, to create new possibilities, to show that different ways of living and working are possible. Your journey, whatever form it takes, contributes to this larger transformation. As this book closes, another day begins. Somewhere, someone is setting their alarm for 5 a.m., preparing to start their own journey of transformation. To them, and to you, I offer this final thought. The dawn of your new day is waiting. The only question is, will you rise to meet it? The journey continues, one sunrise at a time.